This is one. So our pal Odin Horns, who's often in the chat here, asked me this yesterday. He said, Texas has lost running back 1 and running back 4. Will you change your win-loss prediction for the Longhorns? And then I combined this with a question from Eug that's of the preseason top 5, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, or Alabama, who has the best chance at not making the playoff, in your opinion? So I put these two together because remember we talked about this the other day when we were doing the exercise with the AP poll where Ralph Russo had crunched the numbers and figured out, okay, you got to take 4 of the top 5 from the preseason poll, 2 from 6 through 10, 2 from 11 through 20, 1 from 21 through 25, and 3 unranked. So that was hard for me, knocking 1 out of the top 5, because if you look at my post-spring rankings, you look at my projected playoff, I think that all 5 of those teams are going to make the playoff. I think they're among the 5 best teams in the country. I think they're among the 5 deepest teams in the country. So what could happen that would cause that to happen? What would cause them to not make the playoff? And there are factors like Georgia playing its 3 toughest games on the road. Like, what if Georgia lost all 3 of those games? At Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. That would be a reason. But a more likely reason, especially with the teams that are among the deepest in the country, is that one position group just gets decimated by injury. And I think that's the part you got to worry about. And unfortunately for Texas, it's already started with the running back room, and you hope it stops. You hope it stops here. But we talked about it last week with Joe Cook from Inside Texas. They lost C.J. Baxter, who was supposed to be their number 1 running back. And with Joe, and when we were talking to Joe, we're like, okay, Jaden Blue, he takes most of the carries now. Trey Wisner, probably your number 2 back. So then they had Jarrett Gibson and Christian Clark, who were freshmen, who, like C.J. Baxter last year, were probably going to have to play. Now Christian Clark goes down this week with an Achilles tear. So you've basically got 3 scholarship backs now at Texas. You've got Blue, you got Wisner, you got Gibson. That's already thin. That's already thin. You should probably be splitting carries among 3 players in most cases. You're seeing Steve Sarkisian talk about moving different guys to running back, and it looks like they're kind of working some people in. So somebody's probably going to wind up moving from another position to running back. And I would bet that person has to play at running back this season at some point. You hope that those guys that are still healthy, the scholarship guys that are still healthy, can stay healthy all season. But we're talking about the position that takes the most violent collisions in the sport. It's tough to do that. So when you have inexperienced backs, it's not even always worrying about whether they can gain yards on the ground. It's worrying about, are they going to give up sacks because they don't get the protections? Like, I remember when Dalvin Cook was a freshman at Florida State, he was clearly Florida State's best running back. But Jimbo Fisher did not use him extensively until the second half of the season because he was worried about Dalvin Cook in protection, in pass protection. Because Jameis Winston at that point, remember this is the 2014 season, Jameis Winston was throwing the ball into harm's way quite a bit. The idea of having a back who might let the pressure get to Jameis quicker was a little bit scary for Jimbo. So it took a while. Now, eventually he finally did say, look, Dalvin's the best guy. And they got comfortable enough with him in protection to play him more. But that's the key here, is how quickly can they pick up the protections? If you have to move somebody, how confident are you that they'll block the way you need them to block? That's the tricky part with running backs. So if Texas were to not make the playoff because that, one position group got decimated by injury, is a logical reason. And it's the same with any of these other teams. Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, all of them, these are probably the deepest rosters in America, but the rosters aren't that deep anymore. It's not like 2012 when Alabama was so prohibitively deep that there wasn't really an injury situation that was going to cause problems. And I'll say, so the 2017 Alabama team won the national title. They had issues. I believe it was at linebacker, where at one point in the season, they were perilously thin. Now, they got healthier as the season went on, but That's where it can get you. Georgia last year got really thin at wide receiver toward the end of the season. I would say that cost them the SEC championship game, cost them getting into the 4-team playoff. Now, it wouldn't have kept them out of the 12-team playoff, but it might have kept them from winning or going deep in the 12-team playoff if they couldn't get those guys healthy. So that's the tricky part. As Christopher Jordan points out, Texas has to figure out quick going into Ann Arbor week 2. Exactly. That's a tough game. That defense is going to be great. And if you're Michigan, you're good enough on defense that you can dare them to run the ball. If you think the backs may not be able to protect well, you can send the house. Remember, Wink Martindale's taken over as Michigan's offensive coordinator. He's the guy who taught Mike McDonald and Jesse Mentor about defense, but he's not the same as those guys. If you look at Wink Martindale in the NFL versus what those two guys were doing at Michigan, Wink Martindale is a much more blitz-happy coach. Wink Martindale may send the house at Quinn Ewers just to test how well can those backs protect. And you're going to have to max protect if he's sending a bunch of guys, which if you pick them up and you're Texas and you have Isaiah Bond on the outside and you have Ryan Wingo, some of these receivers that they have, you can make them pay for it. But if you don't pick them up, then you put Ewers in harm's way and you have other big problems. So that's where Texas has to deal with this situation. It's terrible luck. They just may be the snake bit team this year. I hope that's not the case. I hope they don't have another injury at that position and that they can just get through this season and we get to see them at mostly full strength. But that's the part you got to worry about, especially when you're talking about teams that are deep, that have good rosters, that bring back a lot of players. There's always somebody from the preseason top 5 that drops. A lot of times it's just because of bad luck, because of injuries. So we'll find out what happens with Texas. Again, I hope the bad luck is over because it's been pretty bad so far. It's been, abnormally bad. So hopefully they'll be okay. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.